So, Tom, good to see you. It's been a while. Last time you and I saw each other, we were both in Atlanta, and we were looking at the latest, greatest from IBC. So right now we're just hanging out in the RHEEM/IBC showroom. And yesterday, you and I were at the HREI Heat Pump Symposium. And what were your thoughts on that event?
It was very familiar in a sense. It was it reminded me very much of the Hydronic Summit.
Yes.
Just the Hydronic Summit, but for heat pumps.
Yeah. Yeah, so we're starting to see a big push away from the traditional way of doing radiant heating. No surprise in that. I mean, boilers are unfortunately going to start to get phased out. We don't know what that market's going to look like. I was on a phone call last night talking about what is the future of heat going to look like for boilers. What's your prediction 10 years from now? What do you think the boiler market in Canada is going to look like? 10
years from now, I think it's going to look pretty similar. It was interesting at the symposium listening to some of the government experts and people who are writing legislation and code and policy around this. They all are pretty clear-eyed about the fact that you can't transform to an electric option overnight.
Yeah.
There's the technical challenges in terms of grid capacity and environmental challenges in terms of grid cleanliness, I guess. Mm-hmm. Not all of the electricity we're generating today is actually better than just burning natural gas at the appliance.
Yep.
In terms of environmental friendliness. So that's a large, long-term project to reinforce and enhance and expand the grid and also clean up all of our electric generation to make it renewable and itself clean, where then when you use electricity at the home, that's the best option for everybody. So that is a 30-year project in my mind. We're looking at 2050 as Canada's legislated target of 2050, where we want to be net zero. Mm-hmm. That's still the time frame we should all be thinking about in terms of completing this project. But the next 10 years are nevertheless, I think, going to be pretty significant. There's so much equipment installed already. And a lot of it will just be replaced with like equipment when the time comes. So I think you're not looking at like a overnight revolution where everything looks completely different. But nevertheless, the Amendment 15, which we're going to talk about, as of July 1st this year, you can't put in gas boilers that are non-condensing mm-hmm. anymore. Mm-hmm. That's not going to be a massive transformation, I think, because when the ModCon revolution happened about 10, 15 years ago, that became the standard for residential gas equipment anyway, was to just put in a wall-hung condensing piece of equipment. So it's what's been happening for a while. So saying that that's now legislated won't affect too many people, but it affects retrofits too. So all of the steel can boilers out, especially out east, where there's, they're running 84% efficient on natural gas, they all have to be replaced with condensing now. Mm-hmm. So it will have an impact. But in the next 10 years, I think you'll see basically the complete end of anything that's non-condensing in terms of boilers, and a significant uptake in air-to-water heat pumps. Taking over a lot of that market. By 2050, I think it's realistic to expect that it's almost exclusively air-to-water heat pumps. So between now and then, looking 10 years down the road, you can expect a big chunk of that market will have converted to that. Air-to-water heat pumps have challenges in terms of electrical consumption at the home. Do you have the panel capacity? Can you actually run one in your house if you're mm-hmm. retrofitting it into your house, or do you need to improve the energy efficiency of the home envelope so you can use a small enough one that your existing panel can take it? Or do you rewire the home and put in a bigger panel? Those are costs that people are going to have to confront and finance. But nevertheless, I think it's going to be happening. You're going to see a lot more of that in the future, not least because today it may be a question of which one do you run at any given time for most for cost savings. Do you run the gas boiler or the electric? Which utility is going to give you the best bang for your buck at any given time, especially if you have time use rates. 10 years from now, I think that'll be basically a shut book. It'll be electric is the option. Gas is always more expensive. Yep. So you'll see more people converting to electric options just because that saves the money over using the gas utility anymore. So.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. So my prediction for 10 years, and we'll see where it goes, is that over the next 10 years is going to be a slow transition, but the best possible outcome, in my opinion, is a hybrid approach. Because if you look at it from the standpoint of retrofit, You look at your house, look at my house, how easily can you retrofit that to an air to water if you're not Mike or Tom? As you know, I have an IBC air to water in my house, and it was pretty easy, but I'm that guy. If you're the average homeowner, average contractor that's never dealt with an air to water heat pump, it can be a challenge. So my only hope is that we don't have a repeat of what happened in the 80s. So in the 80s, hydronic heat pumps, specifically geothermal heat pumps, were really well established by the utilities as this is the future, but the training component wasn't there. And what ended up happening was the industry got a bad name of all these heat pumps have been put in, they don't work properly, so clearly heat pumps don't work. And if we're not careful, especially with air to water technology, we could go down that same road. And the other thing I think is a challenge is people taking the attitude that it needs to be a one or the other. It doesn't necessarily need to be that you go in and you only do a heat pump. Right, as long as we're exceeding the COP of 1 to meet the new mandate for Canada, it does make sense to have an air-to-water heat pump that carries 85-90% of the load. And then for those 5-6 cold degree days where we use a small gas, propane, electric boiler, whatever the case may be. And to your point, our infrastructure has to be able to support your entire neighborhood, not only having heat pumps, but also having EV chargers and all these other things that come into play. So I think it's going to take 10 years before we see the industry sort of start to move. But I think the only thing that's really the unknown is that this time the government is really behind it. Like, there's no messing around that heat pumps are coming. And when you see players like Enbridge on board, like Enbridge is 100% on board for heat pumps. And as we saw yesterday at the heat pump symposium, there was more Enbridge people talking at times than there were heat pump people. And that's a good thing, having them at the table.
Yeah, it's interesting, this moment, to an extent. It's almost like it doesn't matter if the government's on board anymore. Like, the momentum is so substantial behind electrification and heat pump installations that the government kind of just has to catch up and support it. Support it with rebates and whatnot to make it affordable for consumers.
Yep.
But basically, this is what's going to happen.
Yep.
So it's just a question of making sure that when it happens, it's affordable and regulated and efficient and reasonable and manageable. But it's too late to imagine anything but electrification push just completely taking over.
Well, one of the things we have to be conscious of too, and you and I talked about this yesterday at the show, and I know we've talked about it before, is that these changes have to be done for all Canadians. And so where I'm going with that is the couple that just retired. They're in their late 60s, they retired, they were counting on having a $50 gas bill, and then all of a sudden somebody comes in and does a heat pump, they do it poorly, or better yet, they pick a heat pump that has a terrible COP, not understanding what that means. And this poor end user ends up with a $300 electrical bill where they used to have a $50 gas bill. And I like to bring that up just because there are pundits out there, academics, that say, no, it has to be 100% a heat pump, not recognizing that you literally are going to put a whole demographic of Canadians into a position where they can't afford to pay their bills. Whereas if we mandate better heat pumps and look at hybrid applications, we can start to avoid some of that.
Yeah, and I mean, quite frankly, hybrid is never going away. Like, even by 2050, if let's assume that Canada's successful and we hit our net zero carbon goals by 2050, you're still going to have people burning gas appliances at the time. We're just going to try to offset it with something else. But you're never realistically going to be able to serve every customer everywhere with only electricity all of the time.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to explore other options. Some of that'll be propane, some of that'll be next gen fuels like hydrogen boilers and things like that. So it'll be a mix, but it'll always be a mix.
Yeah.
It's just the only reasonable option, especially when you factor in northern Canada, where the heat loads can be quite extreme.
Yeah, let's go to Edmonton and try and make a 5-ton air-to-water work.
Let's go to Iqaluit. Like, you're going to need to have another alternative there.
Yeah.
So knowing that that's going to happen, like, lean in and embrace the hybrid for what it is, and make sure that you know how to design systems accordingly and operate them properly.
You just hit the word. I think that in the past, and you'll probably agree with me on this, if you don't, definitely say it, but in the past we've gotten away with not following good design principles and still being able to make systems work, right? Like, at the end of the day, it's that old distinction of my system is running, not working properly. I talked about it yesterday in my presentation. And a lot of people will say, well, no, me, Michael, my job's all work, nobody called me. And the reality is they didn't call me because I didn't do it right. They called you, and you just didn't tell me you fixed it, right? So as we move forward, we have to have more of a system approach. We need to make sure that if we're doing air-to-water heat pumps or any heat pump, we're properly trained on that equipment. Because, as I said yesterday, heat pumps are not boilers. You can't pipe them that way. But the other thing we need to look at is we need to look at the system outside of the mechanical. Like, the system now with a heat pump also incorporates the house. So my house, before I put in my IBC air to water, I hired Building Knowledge. Everybody knows who they are or should know who they are. They came in, they did a complete assessment of my house and made recommendations on how to reduce my loads. Because at the end of the day, you and I, we're smart guys, but we know better than to try to do that ourselves. They come in and help me find out cost effective, in some cases, a couple $100 in weather stripping to, try to close up the giant holes around my windows. So I think as installers, they need to start looking past the, how do I make 5 tons fill this 80,000 BTU load? It becomes, how do I look at the envelope to bring the envelope down and put an air-to-water heat pump in?
Yeah, for new construction, it's going to be relatively straightforward. I think it was Building Knowledge estimated $20,000 to $30,000 on a new home to make it net zero versus code.
Yep.
So that's relatively low cost when you're building a $1 million house. You can just build that in. Retrofitting is where it's going to be particularly difficult because, who wants to tear down their walls and improve their insulation and things like that. So.
Well, and even the people that can. Like in my own house, I have a long list of things I would like to do. I have the equivalent to these paintings as an opening in my house. That's how bad it leaks. There's a lot of things I would like to be able to do that I just can't because it's a retrofit.
Those are called windows. You got to put a glass on this?
Well, you have to put the glass in the window. Yeah, I made the same joke myself when they did the air changes test at my house. But we need to be conscious of that as we move forward, that in retrofit applications, that is the bulk of where this equipment is going, right? New construction is one thing, but there is a lot of houses that need to be retrofitted, and whatever we come out with, and again, it goes back to that hybrid approach, it's got to work in all these existing homes with existing electrical grids, existing panels. You can't just go into my place and be like, here's your new 400 amp service. Yeah, it needs to work.
About 8 million homes in Canada, probably, that today that exist, and probably less than 2 million of which were built to a modern code where they're even close to net zero. So, yeah, there's a lot of retrofit coming.
And, when we look at codes, some people wrongly look at the code and go, well, if I build a code, I'm building the most efficient home. And again, you can look to people like Gord Cook and Robert Bean that will point out to you that the codes are important, but that's literally the bare minimum. That doesn't mean you're doing good work, whether it's installing a boiler or building a house or installing a heat pump. That's your minimum. Let's try to set the bar a little bit higher than that.
But yeah, for the future of hydronics, in terms we were talking about training and system approach, you kind of got dealt an easy card with boilers. As much as we always point out that boilers are themselves complicated equipment that has to be installed and designed correctly, they are relatively forgiving.
They're very forgiving.
You can get away with a lot in terms of operational performance ranges where you still get heat out and everything works.
Well, to your point, I was just on a 399. You and I talked about it jokingly. It was a 399 that had 1-inch PEX on it. Right, like we look at that and be like, what is going on here? But the reality is, I was still able to tweak that design and make it heat the house. I wasn't happy with it, but when I left, they had heat. I had a few questions, but you do that on an air-to-water heat pump, in 1 month you will see Tom or myself, and it'll be dead. The heat pump will not run.
Yeah.
The forgiveness there is it's not the same. You really do need to know what you're doing.
Yeah, so as we start rolling more and more of those out, training is going to be more important than it's ever been for this industry. To make sure that everything goes smoothly.
Yeah, well, and we're both big proponents for training, so that's something we both believe in, and there is certainly a stigma of, well, I've done this for 20 years. I've heard that from a lot of people. You and I have both done this for many years as well, and you and I both go do continuing education, if not monthly, weekly, where we up our game, and people need to sort of set aside that ego is the word I'm going to use, of like, we recognize and we respect your 20 years of experience, but just understand that we are not taking the same technology to Mars that we took to the moon, and you can't apply the same methodologies to an air-to-water heat pump as you might have done on a boiler.
It's also always possible that you've been doing it wrong for 20 years, so you gotta make sure you're always prepared for a little humility and training.
You don't know what you don't know, right? It's the same comment of, they didn't call you to fix it, they called me, or vice versa. So.
Yeah, every successful installation, no problems. Trail of devastation behind you, and you have no idea. Yeah, you never know.
Yeah. So we've got quite a few changes coming to codes, obviously, and as you had mentioned, after July 1st, the non-condensing is going to be a dead thing. We're not going to be doing that anymore. And then we're going to see some changes coming in January, specifically around domestic hot water.
Yeah, Amendment 15 is kind of the because if our goal by 2050 is pure electrification and almost no gas, Amendment 15 is kind of a first foray into that, where we're starting to the government's starting to truly tighten up efficiency regulations around what we're putting in. Mm-hmm. Amendment 15 specifically affects residential and commercial boilers, gas boilers, oil as well. The oil efficiency is tightening, though not quite as much as with gas, but also commercial water heaters. And the thing that I think is kind of most interesting about Amendment 15 is the domestic hot water boiler is also getting affected, but they kind of missed it when they wrote the code. So I'm not sure what they'll release, but there is a change coming to the volume water heater or domestic hot water boiler code for Canada this year, commercially included, that I don't think anyone else currently knows about. Because so Amendment 15 regulates residential gas boilers to minimum 90% efficient. So condensing only, but again, that's not likely to be a major disruption considering the majority of the market has already been going that way.
If you look
for
at the
a while.
Canadian market, condensing boilers have taken that market over residentially, not commercially, but even commercially, there's a large chunk, unless you're doing hot water heating, that is condensing.
Yeah, so the vast majority of residential installations now are condensing anyway, but retrofits will have to go that way too. There's no carve-out for that. Commercial boilers, it's January 1st, 2025. Commercial space heating boilers have to be, again, minimum 90% efficient, so they will be, and with no exception for retrofits. So any atmospheric boiler you've got out there doing space heating, running a B-vent up the middle of a building for 12 stories, when that fails, you have to replace it with something based on data manufacturer. As of January 1st, 2025, has to be condensing. So that vent may not be usable anymore. You may be looking at running a Cat 4 up that is a chase, at a $100,000 vent installation, or moving your mechanical room. Like, it's going to be problematic when that happens. But that's a significant change for the market. But it also affects commercial water heaters. As of July 1st this year, commercial water heaters, on a retrofit, you can still use an 80% efficient water heater. But on a new build, it must be minimum 90% efficient, which means condensing water heaters. You can no longer put in a low-cost atmospheric or even power direct vent or anything like that. It has to be a condensing water heater for new builds.
What you're going to end up seeing, at least what I'm going to predict we're going to see, is typically right now with a commercial job, if somebody calls us and says, hey, Tom, come give me your feedback on the mechanical, we're going to that mechanical room, we're doing a quick look, where's the venting going, okay, we can make that work, and then we're looking in the mechanical room going, will the equipment fit? It's going to be a little different conversation now, because now we're going to be faced with larger jobs where we might go to something that's near condensing, and not worry too much about that venting. We're going to be less worried about what we can fit in the room and more of how are we venting this? Are we moving this whole mechanical room to the top, to the bottom? Like, what are we doing with it? And we have to be conscious of things like where we're running that venting. We can't just run it up the outside of an exterior wall and not be concerned of like, hey, is there a walkway here? Like, what's going to come? So there's going to be major challenges with venting, obviously. What other challenges do you think we're going to face as we go forward with that?
Venting is definitely the main one. I think a lot of facilities are somewhat unfamiliar still with condensate management. That's going to cause some problems. I still see occasionally some places where the condensate's dumped directly into a drain. I hope that's a plastic drain.
Yeah, it's not a good idea. You want to throw a whole bunch of boilers in and just dump it down the drain. Like, let's come back in a year.
So in a lot of places when they retrofit in a condensing tank, because they have no choice, that's the new, for retrofits for a while you'd be okay, but I think even in retrofits, people are increasingly going to start using condensing tanks because that's probably going to be what's in stock at their local supplier more often than not. So when they put one in, but they don't know anything about a neutralizer, and they don't put one in, and then they corrode away their drain, and they have a massive failure, that's going to be a concern. Yeah.
Now, do you think it's going to go tanks, or do you think it's going to be more a boiler approach with doing storage? Like, where do you think this is going to go?
I think, tanks are tanks outnumber domestic boilers today, and I think that will continue to be the case, especially so that's the interesting thing. The Amendment 15 talks about commercial tankless, but flow-activated tankless, that's 94% efficient minimum now. That's not likely to be a problem either because, again, almost all tankless are condensing, except one of our competitors released a non-condensing tankless this year, which was hilarious to me. Like, what decade are you operating in that you bring out a non-condensing appliance in 2023?
I interviewed them and had the opportunity to ask. It's for the southern United States, so we'll just nod and agree.
It's a bizarre choice, but anyway.
I agree. It was a little bit interesting.
Time and engineering resources developing a non-condensing product in 2023. Anyway, not a choice I would have supported personally, but regardless. So anyway, 94% commercial tankless minimum efficiency. Flow activated, they call that. And then commercial water heaters, they call them storage water heaters. And then boilers, they said space heating boilers. So a volume water heater or a domestic hot water boiler is none of those things. It's not for space heating, it doesn't have storage, and it's not flow activated. It's activated based on a sensor in a tank.
Yeah.
So we actually reached out to Enercan and said, okay, what is your expectation then? Are you just not regulating these? You know, in any particular facility, the space heating load is always so much larger than the domestic that maybe they just meant to leave it alone. They're just not going to get involved in that particular application. But they came back and said they very much intended to regulate it. They just didn't carve it out in the specific language. So their determination was that if it's less than 10 gallons of water in the heat exchanger, you're going to regulate that like a tankless.
Okay.
If it's more than 20, you regulate that like a storage water heater. If it's between 10 and 20, then it's not regulated. I really don't know where they came up with these thresholds. It seems to have been kind of just picked out of the air, but regardless, that's the thresholds that they're going with. So I'm expecting that they're going to put something in writing to explain this all to the market. We're going to put it in writing to explain it all to the market and advertise it so that everyone understands what's happening. But what that means is the majority of the domestic hot water boilers out there do not have more than 10 gallons of water in their heat exchangers, so they're all going to be regulated like tankless. And that takes effect in July. So 3 months from now, volume water heaters that start failing, whether they're atmospheric or B vented or 88% efficient or whatever, they have to be replaced with condensing equipment.
That's going to be a problem.
That's right around the corner, and I really don't think that the market is aware that that is happening at this point. Now, maybe Enercan will come out with an exception and push that back, but at the moment it's July.
Yeah.
So that's going to change a lot. Now, again, new specs that we see coming out for new construction, they've been condensing for a while, so it's more of a retrofit thing. But they're in the tankless portion of Amendment 15. There's no carve out for retrofit.
Yeah.
So if you're, like we've got. High Delta over there, Ray Pack boilers, you can get those for domestic hot water. They're 84% efficient. If you've had that installed for a while and they last 50 years, so if you've got one sitting there humming along and then it finally fails and you need to replace it, all of the infrastructure that you have in place is no use because you have to replace it with a condensing unit. It needs a new vent. It probably needs new pumping. It's
the same discussion. If you go from a non-condensing, I've never installed non-condensing or been involved because I'm a heat pump guy. But you go from non-condensing to a condensing. It's the same discussion of going from the condensing to the heat pump. You now need to start over in that mechanical room. There's going to be very little stuff you can keep. And it's a good comment on that 10 gallons. If it's got less than 10 gallons in it, there's a lot of applications where there's product installed that meets that criteria. And I wonder how many people know that, not just contractor, wholesale, but even at the regulatory level of, hey, what have we done here?
Yeah, honestly, I'm not sure Enercan can even get the word out to the inspectors fast enough to catch them all, because I'm sure some retrofits are going to happen after July and just nobody knows that it shouldn't have happened. It wasn't code approved.
Now, you had mentioned that you guys are going to be doing some promotion around Amendment 15. So how does that look? Like, obviously, you're going to do some, I would assume, some webinars, maybe some in-person training. We'll probably collaborate on some of that since we're aligned in that view. What do you see that unfolding like?
Well, we'll also have in the trade magazines some, are you amendment ready advertising, because if you're a facility owner, you've got a suite of equipment, potentially you run multiple buildings and multiple boiler rooms, and you're gauging the life of your equipment and what's going to fail when, and you're planning and budgeting for retrofits. Some of those retrofits, based on when Amendment 15 takes effect in that particular segment, may not look at all like you think they're going to look, because the landscape of the available equipment may be completely different than what you're planning on doing. You may be budgeting for buying a horizontal copper tube atmospheric replacement that's no longer available.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure that customers, engineers, contractors, everyone knows this is what's coming, and when that all takes effect, here's the suite of equipment that we have that is amendment ready, that you can design around, plan around, and know it'll be fine, that you can install it no matter any time, and it'll still be code compliant and efficient enough, and you got nothing to worry about. Which we have equipment in every category, that often multiple options in every category that you can go with. But if you don't know what's coming, you could design it wrong, get to potentially even install something and have a knowledgeable inspector walk in and just say, nope, you got to take that out. You can't put that here anymore.
Yeah, so I mean, if you look at your product line, obviously we're not here to promote any particular product line, but we are here. So if you look at the IBC line, you have the iFire series, which is a new series that come out. Would that be something people could start to apply into these applications?
Yeah, so for IBC, it's relatively simple. Everything IBC sells is code compliant after Amendment 15. So no question. RHEEM and RHEEPAC, it's kind of a mixed bag. Some of the stuff is not efficient enough and will go away. But there's, for both brands in every segment, there is stuff available that is efficient enough that will be code compliant once Amendment 15 takes effect.
Yeah, and we're seeing that. We're sitting in your showroom right now, so nobody can see all the equipment behind us. But there's a mountain of equipment installed, and you guys have already noted, like, hey, this is coming out. Our new, flag piece is going to be sitting here. So you guys have products that are coming. Are you able to talk, like, what is sort of on the roadmap for either IBC or for RHEEM, since you're both the same company? I think I said that correctly. Like, are you guys working with new refrigerants? Are you looking at CO2? Are you looking at A2L? Like, what do you see coming down the road that you can tell me?
Yeah. So very much we are on top of that. I think we have an entire team of people who are specialists in refrigerant. So we are very much looking at what's the next generation refrigerants that we need to be planning for. For a lot of our equipment, I know 454B will be the drop-in for 410 that we're currently using. So fairly straightforward. But yeah, we're looking at after that, and for the higher temperature applications, and what are other options that we need to be exploring. So it's early to be talking about it, even besides trying to be proprietary. It's just I don't think enough has been settled in terms of our direction to go proffering any opinion on what's coming next, because we're still exploring options.
Yeah.
But yeah, we are definitely working on that. The main thing I would say is the focus across the company is really on heat pumps and decarb. What are the next gen products we need on the roadmap for the push towards 2050, where we are running electric products, decarbonization push, as many heat pumps as possible, and the ancillary equipment that comes with all of this, because air quality, indoor air quality, and water softening, things like that. We can get involved in the entire suite of equipment that goes around our boilers as well.
Yeah.
Boilers and water heaters. So, and furnaces and air conditioning. I mean, we're into the entire mechanical package, really. For a home, we can supply basically everything in your mechanical room today. Commercially, we're getting there. So it's we're very, as an organization, we're very long-term focused. We don't get bogged down in the short-term thinking. We pay attention to the short-term, but our focus is longer.
Yeah.
So we're looking at 30 years from now, when you're into 2050, what does that mechanical room look like? What is the if you're an engineer in a commercial, what does your plans look like 15, 20 years from now? Your systems are going to be different. They were different 20 years ago than they are now. They'll be different again 20 years from now. So we want to make sure we're thinking about that and putting our engineering resources and our creativity towards the future so that we're ready for whatever comes next.
Yeah, I think that the slow approach makes sense too, right? I always make the comment, I'm sure you've heard me say it many times, that my ethos on how we do business is we're not growing grass or wheat, we're growing trees. So that takes a lot longer. You can grow your lawn in a week, but if your approach to product is what can we turn out in a week versus what do we think the market's going to look like in 10 years, and as we both know, you and I might plan for something next week, something comes up, and we have to not abandon our plans, but adjust them. And I'm sure that IBC and RHEEM are going to do so accordingly as things change, because there's going to be refrigerants and technologies that come out that don't even exist right now. You look at the stuff that people like Elon Musk are doing, and it's like, this guy, all he does is dream up crazy things. I mean, we have an AI system right now, ChatGPT, that can literally write software just because Tom asked it to write software. We don't know where the market's going to go, but I think it's exciting. And it's going to be challenging, but everybody who's in our industry right now that's invested, whether you're an engineer, a contractor, a building inspector, or a manufacturer, it's all opportunities.
Greatest challenge we're all going to face in the next 10 years, I think, is, not that I think, this is a recognized problem, is labor. There's just fundamentally going to be a challenge of getting
knowledgeable, skilled people on the tools. How do you think we fix that? I asked Martin from HREI yesterday, because HREI has been, a great advocate for apprenticeship programs. What I had said to Martin is I do a lot of training, and one of the disconnects I see is my son is in grade 11. He's now working with me, and he's excited to get into the trade. And what I'd said to Martin is I think there's a disconnect that we somehow need to get people like me and you in front of high schoolers so that they can understand, like, hey, look at us. Our hands are clean. We're presentable guys. We like what we do. We're very passionate. The stigmas of what it means to be in the trade need to change, and I'm not sure if our strategy is right. Are we getting people too late, or do we need to get them younger? Do we need to be more focused on how do we retrain people? That guy who's a bus driver and hates driving bus, let's bring him into our industry. Let's get him doing things. Short term to fix the immediate problem, which I think is like a third of the skilled trades retiring in the next 5 years. That's the kind of problem that you need government intervention to resolve. That means somebody's going to have to pay for retraining, taking people from other jobs, pay for their refrigeration certification or gas tech or whatever it's going to be. Because it's not going to be the kind of thing that just showing up to trade schools and trying to make that more popular or it's too late, right? The people that want to be in trade school are already there. We need to get the people who are not engaged in the trade. Well, that's relevant for 10 years from now to get those people coming through. But for 5 years from now, when all those people have left the workforce, something else, some larger force is going to be required to get people in to replace them. It may already be too late to avoid some sort of problem because we haven't already been paying for that and retraining and reskilling people for the last few years. So we're probably going to be facing a pinch regardless, but we're going to need larger involvement. I think ultimately the biggest shift that we need to recognize is to change the stigma, as you put it, and change the culture around this, is recognize the income imbalance that these roles have is not what it was. So 20 years ago, everyone being told you should go to university, you should go be a doctor or whatever. Yeah. I went through that. I'm sure you went through that. Yeah, that's the only way you can earn. Here's the difference in your earning over a lifetime, and it's the only way you can earn a respectable income or whatever. Tradespeople already earn fantastic wages if you're skilled and valued. You can be compensated quite well. As the shortages increase, those wages will increase. And I mean, I jokingly say it, but only half jokingly. 10 years from now, I think refrigeration techs are going to be paid like doctors, if not better. They're going to be earning $500,000 a year because there's going to be so much demand for people to work on all these heat pumps we've been putting in at a high rate and will continue to put in, and they're failing and they need someone to go service them, and there's just simply not enough refrigeration techs around to do it. I think it's going to be an extremely highly valued workforce. So the messaging to younger people is this is a not only a viable career where you can earn good money, but potentially your highest earning potential is to get into the trades. Like even if you became a doctor, you may not earn as much money as if you're a refrigeration tech, so you should probably go do that. Well, so in my own case with my family, I can say this because my wife will never watch this video. Famous last words, Tom. I had to point out to my wife, because she doesn't know anything about the trade. I mean, she's a nurse. I had to show her the average income for a service technician from college to trades. And the reality is that my son is a grade 11. All he has to do is get a basic license. He's going to make the same money that my wife makes as a nurse with 16 years experience. And the other thing I think is important to note is that when I started in the trade, it was a dirty, grimy job. I can remember taking out an old coal oil boiler to retrofit that into a near condensing boiler. Like, it was a dirty work. It was very labor intensive work. Just sort of like we're driving around in EVs now and how cool that is, the mechanical rooms aren't like they used to be. Everything is cutting edge. It's all software based. If you're good with math and you like playing with software, you're that kid who did a lot of gaming, whatever the case may be, the reality is coming in and building these mechanical systems is in a lot of ways like playing Minecraft or building software. Like, it's not that, oh, you're not smart enough to go to university, so you have to now go lug bricks or whatever it is. It's a rewarding career where you got to use this. Yeah, I mean, there's still grunt work involved. Somebody's got to lift pipes. For sure. Somebody's got to pull wrenches. But yeah, there was the culture around it has definitely shifted and continues to shift. Yeah, it was a bit of an old boys club, and these gruff old guys, hands carved out of stone. You had to learn how to duck. They not only didn't care about getting dirty, they wore it as a badge of honor. And if you didn't, then they didn't like you for that. And they're still around, and there's still some of that, but it has shifted a lot. And there's an expectation that the job
will be enjoyed and enjoyable.
Yeah,
So-
the trades are more of a mentorship program. I went through similar with, sounds like you did, like a lot of the journeymen I worked with, if they didn't like what I was doing, I knew something would come in my direction. There might be a few expletives, loud voices. The industry's not like that anymore. It no longer is that good old boys club. It's very inclusive. People from all walks of life belong in the trade. It's sort of the same thing where we have women in HVAC. I can't relate myself because I don't separate the two, but I talk to a lot of women in HVAC who remind me that there still is that stigma where guys think that a woman can't do this job. And to me, it's mind-blowing, but this industry is quite literally for everybody, whether you're a 40-year-old guy or a gal who's like, I don't like what I'm doing. I don't want to be a nurse anymore. You know, I'd like to go put air-to-water equipment in. The reality is if you are sharp enough to be a nurse, then you're probably sharp enough to do what we do. But it's no longer oh, you're a nurse, you're too smart to be working in the trade. The reality is the trades are just as challenging. It's a different kind of challenge.
Yeah. I mean, the culture's not completely changed. There's still pockets of problems, no doubt. But improving generally. And yeah, I mean, to this point, the mechanical systems that are being put in, like it's like the old, they're so complicated. Like you say, a lot of computerized elements to it too. So they're so complicated now. For on any given project, most of the technicians and tradespeople working on it don't understand most of the job. They're just doing their piece.
Yeah.
But it's like the old joke. You used to size a boiler by standing on the sidewalk and holding up your hand, and however many fingers it took to cover the house. That's how many segments you put in. Now you got to do a little bit more than that to get it. Because if you put in a modern condensing boiler and you dramatically oversize it, you're going to cause yourself a lot of headaches.
Yeah.
All mechanical systems are going the same way, especially now. If you get into like a heat pump, hydronic air handler, tankless, and maybe hydronic heat pump application, you know 4 or 5 different mechanical systems that are all designed to work together, and you have to know how that functions. How do you connect it correctly? How do you stage and control it correctly? There's a lot to know. So. Yeah, now it's a technical and demanding field more so than in the past, in a good way, like a challenging and interesting way. But as a result, wages need to reflect that. Like these tradespeople running this,
Yeah, and they do.
Yeah, and they will be going up. So that's, I think, the reason we have so few tradespeople is we spent so much time telling everyone to go to university because that's the only way you could earn enough money to retire. And now. That wasn't true then, truly, but it's really not true now. Now it's very much the case that you can earn a pile of money being a tradesperson and have job security like you couldn't believe. So, yeah, it's.
Do you think there's something manufacturers could do with on that front? So if we look at the apprentice shortage, you know, RHEEM and IBC are these giant entities. Is there something that RHEEM and all the other manufacturers could do collaboratively to try to engage and bring more people into apprenticeship programs?
Well, manufacturers don't always like doing things collaboratively, but
that's true.
Yeah, we can and we will. There's stuff we're going to be doing to promote and connect with trade and vocational schools, and then try to help connect them with employers, with our customers that are contractors that are looking for labor. So yeah, we'll do our part, but ultimately a lot of it too is going to be paying for the skills, because some people, like you say, maybe you're 40 years old and you've been working in a commercial kitchen your whole life and you hate it, so you're looking for a new job.
Yeah.
You can't just walk onto a job site and start being a gas tech or a refrigeration tech. You need to apprentice, you need training, you need time in school. That costs money and it takes time, and then there's going to take a lot of different avenues of support to make that happen for people, but that is what needs to happen. The government and manufacturers and whoever else can do our part to fund those things. But it takes money and time and support. So.
Yeah, I think its openness needs to be sort of embraced as well. I sort of look at it, I'm obviously biased. If I meet somebody like, oh, you worked in the field, great, you worked on tools, you understand this stuff. But some of the best people I see in our industry right now don't have any previous experience. Like they'll come in with some, automotive background, and they go through the same training processes that you and I've been through, but they just bring a completely unique perspective. And some of the things that the industry needs to do is just sort of stand back and go, you know what, that guy who used to fly 747s and now works on boilers is of greater value because he or she brings a totally different perspective than how you and I would approach something, because they haven't done this for 20 years or, however many decades we've worked at this.
Yeah. Yeah, and probably the simplest short-term fix too is to recognize for new immigrants to the country, recognize their skills from their home country, recognize that they already have the knowledge and skills to do this. They may not have gone through our local certification program, but if we just kind of evaluate the skills that they have from where they're coming from and say, yep, that's good enough, you're ready to go, here's your certification, and you're now licensed to operate here, that would help a lot too, because a lot of people are coming, think about somebody immigrating from Europe, they're miles ahead of us in terms of heat pump adoption.
Steam fitter that comes from Germany and doesn't qualify for a license here. Meanwhile, they're literally a steam fitter from Germany, more qualified than we can imagine.
Right. They go to our trade school and say, you guys, this is enough?
Yeah, I just did a 300-ton chiller. I think I can handle working on a 5-ton air-to-water.
Yeah,
right.
So that would help us a lot too if we would just recognize the skills of the people that are already coming here looking to do those jobs, happy to do those jobs, and earn the good wages that come from them. Like what a dream, right? You take your skills from wherever you're coming, you're immigrating to Canada for whatever reason you're immigrating, and you can just take this massive skill set that you have and start earning like 6-figure salaries right away because your skills are valued here. Like that's an easy win for the government.
Well, that's interesting because if you look at groups like HREI and CHC, that is actually a really good idea. That's something that they could do, because the reality is if somebody comes over, let's say somebody comes over from Europe and says, I have 10 years experience designing boiler plants, I'm not sure they'd go to a college to get that, validation, because it's a little bit different animal. But HREI and CIPH have people like yourself that you and I can spend time with somebody and in the period of a day in a classroom setting, figure out they literally know what they're doing. Let's give them the test. Let's have them write the test and qualify these people without them having to go through maybe a college or university approach to starting over. You can achieve a lot in a short window with experienced people.
Well, not that they would necessarily do it, but the colleges and universities would be somewhat hard to trust for this because they're kind of inherently motivated to make people take their courses.
Yeah.
So
they're profit motivated. We're not knocking it, but they are profit motivated.
So there's a potential that they would not fairly evaluate the person's foreign country credentials fairly. But maybe it's not even evaluating the individual, but for HRI to say, we know what the German certification programs look like, so if you have this German certification, that equates to this in Canada. Yeah. So you already have that equals, here you go, you're all set to go. Yeah. But we do similar stuff with driver's licenses. If you've got a fully certified driver's license in Britain and you move to Canada, we don't make you start with a G1 and somebody sitting in the car with you. You can just get your license.
Well, it's like when I leave Ontario to go to the States to see a friend or a vendor, I don't have to stop at the border, get out of my car because my license suddenly doesn't work in the United States. It's fully achievable. And I think that if you looked at, HREI can definitely put together a program where they look at the German, we're just picking on Germany here, go, this is a great program. But the other side of it too is if HREI were to confirm this is a great program, and then you take those individuals and put them into an all-day training validation class with somebody like Dave Hughes, like that makes a ton of sense. In a day, he can definitely figure out, okay, we've got a good group here that understands the principles, here's a qualification test, now you're good, and within a matter of a few months, we can suddenly find ourselves having a lot of really good technicians that are already here and we don't even know about them.
Yeah, and it's not like we're taking jobs away from anybody. The fact is we're going to have a shortage.
We need people. We have a shortage right now. There is not enough techs. I mean, you and I both know that because we get the phone calls of, hey, do you know anybody? I wish I did.
Bean was talking about the Canadian Hydronics Conference last year. He was saying, Ontario wants to build 1.5 million homes by 2030. And as he put it, who's going to build them?
Yeah, well, and who's going to put the heat pumps in, right? Yeah. And if we don't have people to put the heat pumps in, as much as some people will go, oh, these wages are too high, it's going to be a problem. If we don't have these people, that $10,000 mechanical rate now, when we run out of people, is going to be $50,000 in 10 years, if not $100,000, because when there's nobody to put it in, you have to keep increasing that wage to try to lure people into the industry. But to me, I think it's a disconnect in communication. I don't know what the fix is. Hopefully by talking to lots of people, which I have been, we can come up with ideas on how to fix it. But there are people that can do the work. And we just need to try to engage with Canadians and people that are immigrating into Canada of how do we get them engaged.